you all, but I hope you're all safe. It's pretty beautiful, brutal outside. Brutal. Um, and sorry about that. I accidentally let somebody in there, Michaela. I hope that's okay. Let's see. Let me share with you. No. Okay. I just shared the text sheet with Michaela. We're going to be putting this together today, everybody, as a team. We're going to be learning together, putting it together. Parshat Mishpatim is just so full of beautiful Torah and laws and also strange narrative. And it's kind of almost overwhelming, the number of places that we could jump into this ocean of meaning. I chose something a bit more prosaic for us to look at today. There is, of course, what we talked about last night in the shul, this wild vision that Aaron and his two kids, Nadav and Avihu, and Moshe and the Shivim Zekini, the 70 elders, have. Could have jumped in there, but decided to do something a bit more down to earth and frankly a little bit more halachic, interestingly enough, that is in a parsha of halachot. Let's see where we go. We don't want a lot of conversation here from all of you. Can't hear? You can hear or you can't hear? Jay says you can hear. No, you were talking, it's something else. Time out.
The audio is fine, Rabbi David.
Oh, okay. The sheets, there's a problem with the sheets, Jay? Okay, something about the sheets going on here. We don't really need to do this charades. I mean, we could, we can unmute Jay, ask him to unmute and tell us what's going on. Sounds like sheets. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, what is it? Jay?
Yeah, how many syllables, Mario? That's a reference to Putney Swope. For some of us, the link to PDFs don't seem to work, and it's better to give a link to the source sheet on Safaria or whatever. That's been an ongoing issue.
Oh, I think we know about that, but I didn't. It's my fault. I didn't give that link to. I'll give you that link right now.
Thank you.
No worries. Let me get that to you, Michaela. Let's put this sentence together. This is going to be a sentence. I'm going to get the link. I'm going to put it into the box and send it to Brussels, and then Brussels will send it to you, Jay. Okay, so that's so we know that we're living in a crazy world. Let me go.
You could not do the detour to Brussels. You could just put it to everyone. But if you like it to, travel.
It's also true. Oh my goodness. Okay, here we go. I'll just bring it up, and there it is. I'll send it directly to the folks. Directly. There you go. All right. I hope that helps. Jay, since we had you unmuted, why don't we have you make the blessing this morning, okay? How's that sound?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. You didn't even wait for me to put it up. I'm so thankful. Look at that. All right. Let's look at the sheets for today. right. I don't like this. Even the sheet is too. All right. So as I said, the parsha is chock full at 53 mitzvot. It comes in as the portion of the parsha that has the single number of mitzvot, of commandments that are very, very practical. Many of which are very, very, very much a part of building a holy world, building a society that is grounded in Sinai. Right, and in many ways we've said over the years that Parshat Mishpatim is the laundry. After the ecstasy of Sinai comes the laundry list of how do you live it out in the world. I think that Ken Wilber or somebody else said that one of the ironies of the human potential movement was that it didn't maximize its potential, and then went on to explain that in most of the world of self-development and self-actualization, a lot of it was based on peak experiences that people had when they would go away for weekends, to Esalen and to, Omega, Kripalu, all of these very intense human potential moments that would be epiphanies, but then would drop people right back into their lives, and they would be clamoring to regain what they had a taste of over the weekend. And in that way, Sinai is naturally, or Parshat Yitro, and Sinai is very naturally followed by Mishpatim, which is a kind of like, how do you take the weekend into the week? How do you take, the Sinai moment into your everyday interactions, everyday Zen, everyday Sinai? And that, I guess, obviously the tabernacle, which will come up this coming week, a week from today, will be the beginning of the Mishkan story, the story of the building of the portable sanctuary. I guess the original Zumagog was the Mishkan, right? The moving, target. The moving moment. But the question, of course, of Mishpatim, the Parshiot, chapter 21, chapter 22, 23, and 24 of Exodus, in that they come after 1920, which is Sinai, is really how do you walk it out into the world. And one little letter, which I speak about it every year, this little vav that begins the Parsha, Ve'elah HaMishpatim, and these, not these, and these, right? Sinai gives you this, and Vav is what walks it out in the world. Because the Vav letter is the Mosif al Rishonim, it adds to what came before, right? So it connects and threads together, as Roberta said so beautifully, Roberta Wall, in her blog this week, or I think it was this week or last year, about the contiguity between what we bring from the past into the present, into the future, and how we work with that. And in this case, it's really, let's go into this, the beginning of chapter 23, and let's look at this together. And what I'm hoping to do also is to be able to actually look at the Rambam together, Maimonides, and actually use that to kind of look at a kind of halachic corpus on how you walk this out in the world. Not just why you do it, but how you do it. So, Exodus 23. Lo tisa shema shav, right? You must not carry false rumors. Al tashes yadcha im rasha lios eid chamas. Do not place your hand with an evil person. Liot eid chamas, to act as a malicious witness. Don't conspire to bring a false rumor, right? It seems that these are two distinct commandments, right? Not to bear false witness, lifting up the name here, right? It's again, the translation is not literal, but the literal will explain some of what is being right. What's going on? Lo tisa, don't lift up. Lo tisa, don't lift. Shema shav, an empty name. This is not the commandment not to bear false witness by swearing, but not to carry. Literally means here, do not carry an empty name or false rumors, the way that they translate this based upon how the rabbis understood this. And then do not join hands with someone to be what's called eid chamas, a malicious aid, a malicious witness. Lo tiya achrei rabim l'ra'ot. Do not follow, right, with the majority to do wrong. Lo tiya, do not be with. It's an interesting. Lo tiya achrei rabim l'ra'ot. Do not be after or follow after the rabim, the many, for the sake of ra'ah, to do something evil. Right? V'lo ta'aneh al riv lintot achrei rabim la'atot, and you shall not give perverse testimony. Lo ta'aneh, right? Do not answer here al riv when there is a conflict, or lintot achrei rabim la'atot, meaning just because the majority is inclining, right, in a dispute, don't follow that majority, and just because they're in the majority, when it comes to jurisprudence, or in a moment of riv, of conflict. And here rabim here means, they're translating as mighty, could also mean again the majority. It's used this way. Rabim here is many, rabim many. But you'll see in verse 3 that this is really talking about those who are poor, or those who don't have power. It's really it's a conversation about power, right? So do not incline towards the many, right? Don't let that be the motivation for what is just. And similarly, also because we're interested in justice, vidal lo tehedar birivo. Just because someone is poor doesn't mean that you should show deference to them either in a dispute, right? Let justice prevail, not the relative power or absence of it for when it comes to justice. Now, it's in the context of those 3 verses now that there's a pivot towards the verses that I want us to look at. The reason I brought the first 3 verses is to try to understand what that pivot might be. I'd like to understand how if there is contiguity between these 3 verses, the first 3 that we looked at, and now these that I'd like to actually hone in on. Ki tifgash or oyivcha or chamaro to'eh, hashev tishivenu lo. If you see the ox of your enemy, oyivcha from the word oyev in Hebrew means enemy, or chamoro, or his donkey, to'eh basadeh, it's to'eh, not basadeh, to'eh, hashev tishivenu lo, you are to return it to that person. Ki tir'eh chamor son'acha, now, slightly different language. It's not that you happen upon it when it comes to, right, you're not exactly looking for it, but you happen upon the ox, or you happen upon the donkey, you have to return it to that person. And now the Torah turns to a second verse. If you see chamor son achar rovetz tachat masa'o, if you see the donkey of your enemy and is lying under its burden, it's rovetz means it's crouched. The word rovetz means to crouch. Tachat masa'o, it's carrying a burden that's too heavy for it. V'chadalta me'azov lo, the Torah asks, and you. The Torah here, it's very unique. It's almost rhetorical. It asks the question, "V'chadalta me'azov lo," and you might refrain from helping or raise it. The word me'azov lo is very interesting. Why does it say azov? Usually means to walk away. La'azov means to leave it, but here it means to help. Azov ta'azov imo. You must nevertheless, right? Lift you must lift, or help you must help with him. Imo, with him. These are the 2 verses. So I'm wondering, right, these 2 verses, before we get into the particulars of each of them, and I want to look at the particulars of each of them in some detail, I'm wondering if we could open it up now, open up the open book and wonder together, what if there's a thematic connection between the opening 3 verses that deal with justice and jurisprudence, and these 2 verses which deal with, right, with both the return of a lost object to one whom you might be disinclined to return that object to, and helping someone who is whose donkey or whose animal is struggling, and they are also struggling. What is the connection between them? If anybody'd like to find some connective tissue, take a couple of minutes for that. So let's open it up for hands. Let's, I don't know who to, Nehemiah, you have your hand up first. So go ahead if you want to go. I don't know if you want to go, but go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, please. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm saying what I wasn't able to say last week about Jethro.
No. Please,
You won't let me?
I will let you at some other point, but let's first stay with the open book.
So I'll relate to this one. Okay. The Torah is like, So, לא תענה לנטות אחרי רבים להטות. I'm sorry to say, we're all doing it. We are going with the majority in the world because that's the inclination. We read 24 hours by the people who own the press, and we believe it. By time come, the wind that was against me and against people like me is changing and starting to be in my back. In England, Wales, Ireland, Israel, New York will be the last. So that's my word of Torah for the parasha of today, and I have something to say about Jethro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Willie.
Morning. Would you mind pulling the text right back up? So I saw a connection between line 2 of the second paragraph, and I'll just use the English here. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong, and also line 3, nor shall you show deference to a poor man in his dispute. It almost seems like you shall not, the way I read that is you shall not like side with any way, or with any side, for any particular reason. Like you shouldn't take advantage of the circumstances that are before you to perhaps benefit you in some way. And I see a direct connection of that with number 4 and number 5. Not only in line 4, it's your enemy's ox. It's not, say, your neighbor's ox. You shouldn't just take advantage of the situation. You stumble upon it, you're not looking for it, but it happens to be your enemy's ox. So maybe that means because it's your enemy, you might be more tempted to take it. But even in situations like that, you should remain neutral and give it back, even if it be your enemy. Even if it benefit you to support the mighty to do wrong, because you might benefit from that, you should still remain impartial. Right, even if it benefit you to support the poor person in court over this issue, you should still remain impartial. So you shouldn't take advantage of the situation for your own benefit, regardless who it be.
Thank you. Wow. So essentially, do the right thing, and even if it is at great, like even if your own personal benefit from doing the wrong thing, the Torah is kind of doubling down on human nature as such, and kind of speaking to our Yetzer Hara, speaking to our, let's say, our almost unskillful egoic strivings, like to counter out that, like stay true to what's true, and don't be right. Beautiful. Thank you, Willie. Yesher koach. Love that. Jay, go ahead, brother. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Similarly, I see that connection as well, that notion of almost like a most extreme case, and even in that situation, there's another measuring stick here, not your own self-interest. But I think what also connects it, I'm really fascinated by that last word in 5, emo. So it's not even, there's almost like a cooperative gesture here. It's you're actually with the enemy in a active act, so to speak. And I sort of, that's not explicit in the first 3 verses, but I think it's there. To me, it's about relationship, and it's the relation to the other. Even if the other is very different than you, poor, rich, whatever, there's still another measuring stick or a particular way to behave that where you are connected to the other, even when the other is very different.
It's very important that you brought attention to that word emo. We'll see later, hopefully, if we get to it, how the rabbis understood that with him, right? To be with him in lifting. And I do like that you, like focusing on the relationship here, I think is really key too, that there is, like all of it is relations, like definitions, or all of the definitions are also relational, right? Right. And someone whom you hate, right? All of these are relations and identifications, and the Torah is essentially saying, as you're saying, it's about staying in some version of just relationship with those who you're with. And beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you, Jay. And we're going to come back to the emo. Paul?
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Paul.
I agree with both prior comments, just as a way of elaborating, perhaps. I see both as examples of God understanding where society is at the time of Sinai. I think God is trying to meet the Israelites where they are, and understanding that the force of God's word will assist the consistency of interrelationships that precede this moment. And the image that I have in my head as I speak is a witness putting its hand on the Bible. Why does that happen? It is helpful to have the force of God to support your actions, even when they might be difficult to do.
So I love that you brought something very, very powerful here, and it's something that is, I think, should be clear from the juxtaposition of Mishpatim to Yitro or Sinai. And even the language here, as you said, the language of where we are, the language of the reality of our day-to-day. I mean, I'm very attuned to many of the accounts of monks. I remember Joseph Goldstein, in one of his books, or maybe it was Jack Kornfield in The Path of the Heart. I don't remember which. Anyway, one of the books where he talked about coming back from having been in intense, immersive meditation seclusion in Thailand, and then getting into a relationship and moving in with his girlfriend, and being completely overwhelmed by the number of things that he hadn't worked through yet, even though he'd had these intense, peak experiences, and he'd become, as close to enlightenment as he could possibly have imagined. And all of a sudden, here he was in a relationship with a woman, and he was getting angry, and all these, all of this stuff was coming up. And it took years, I think, for many of those who thought that all you had to do is turn to a wall and meditate and have and work through your koan practice or daven through various things, to realize that you could be on one level at Sinai and then still have all of the shadow that comes up in relationship and in society. And the Torah is really attuned to that, like the walking out of enlightenment, the walking out of God consciousness in the particulars of our day-to-day living, and the kind of the reality of it in the way the Torah says it, right? And yet to still have the force of the divine, or the force of that, putting the hand on, as you said, to swear, like the impetus to continue to grow in bringing Sinai into moments like this is really, I think, what's at play here. And I think you named that very beautifully, Paul. So thank you. Margot.
Shabbat shalom, boker tov.
Boker tov.
It's easy to abuse when you have power and when you have numbers, when there's a mob. It's easy to do what's wrong. I'm reading Rabbi Laura Doan Kaplan's wonderful book, The Mouth of the Donkey, where she looks at all of the animals in Tanakh, and she looks at the donkey, which is mentioned here. It's abusive to put a burden that they can't handle. And if the ox gets lost, then it won't be taken care of, and it will tear up people's fields. We had been beasts of burden under Egyptian slavery. We had been treated as animals that had power over, and this is what's unjust, and we should do what's just. It's tempting to just look at the neighbor that you're helping or the enemy, and it's easy to abuse people when you just call them your enemy, like we do now, or to be apathetic and not to want to help them. They're suffering, but it's okay. They're our enemies, and so we see that justice for all creatures can be served. Dibarti.
And I love that you brought in the ever-present awareness that Mitzrayim, that Egypt in the biblical mind and in the Torah's own philosophy is at the core of an ethical and moral imperative, right? You know this experience, right? You know what it is to have backbreaking labor. You know what it is. And in fact, it's the word lach, there is that word. I don't know if it's used here by animals, but in general, lo tilchatz, like do not oppress, is very much like so much of the Torah is based upon the experience of what it was for us to be dehumanized, and so therefore do not dehumanize. So thank you for bringing that, and certainly Laura Duhan Kaplan's book. Anything Laura does is important to lift up. She's a remarkable teacher. Thank you, Margot, Mariam. Roberta, go ahead.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, Shabbos.
Most everything I could even think of has already been said, just kind of adding a little sugar or salt to it. It's like God is giving a bigger picture.
Yes.
And I love what Margot just shared, because I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, look at animals, don't leave anything out. If you want to step into this consciousness that is being offered to us as humans, like it's don't close off anywhere. No Mitzrayim, no constriction. Like just keep opening it and opening it and opening it. And it really, I'm so excited that you've highlighted this, because like you said, it's such a packed parsha. I had never focused on this really. And it's like, okay, here you're being forged as a new nation, a new experiment in humanity. And here's the shadow side. And also I love that it says your enemy. I don't hear that the great creator being, our guide, has an enemy. I hear this recognition that we are going to make enemies because we're still stuck in limited consciousness. Yeah, it's just so rich. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see in a moment. We'll look at Maimonides. We'll see that nobody knows who this enemy is. We'll see in a moment, but it is certainly yours and not mine, as it were, in divine speech. So that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Roberta. Go ahead, Aluma. Shabbat Shalom, Aluma.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm very curious, and maybe this is really kind of simplistic, but what I'm seeing is not just the lifting up of relationship, but how to lift it up. It's not just through deeds or speaking. The first one is about speaking and the breath and how you can lift up or draw down through the breath. And the other one is an actual physical doing. So it's not just by speaking, it's also by doing. So there has to be this balance about living in the world and thoughts and thinking of how to live in the world, which brings it back. How do you bring Sinai back down here?
Very much. I think that's spot on. I think that in classic rabbinic philosophy, there are three domains. There's thought, speech, and action. And there are, generally speaking, when people speak of Judaism as a place which doesn't legislate or even invite us to think in a particular way, I think that's clearly a misrepresentation of Judaism. So there's thought, there's speech, and there's action. And you have, to some degree, all three of them are in these two verses, right? Or all five of them, right? There's the recognition that certain thoughts or certain frames of mind will themselves be a part of the way that you look at the world. And there's speech, right? The way that we speak reality based upon those thoughts, and then also the ways that we behave. And we have to actually fix the world, as it were, or improve the world, evolve the world, by cleansing our minds and our thought and our speech and our action. I think all three of those are in this Thank you for bringing that. That was really also, that added quite a bit. Thank you. Aluma, thank you. Sarah Tova? Oops. We double clicked. I clicked at the same time as Michaela. Sorry, Michaela. Go ahead.
You hear me now?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Got it, no worries. So for me, the animal self, the animal part of our being, is very much connected with the animal part of our enemy. And that we are, I'm trying to find the text. Yes, so that we are to leave the animal part of suffering with our enemy. We are not separate. We, like our enemy, have this animal part that we abhor, and we need to leave it together. So that's how I read it.
So it's beautiful. I think that in Kabbalistic literature, certainly, when you hate your body, which is often in Kabbalistic and then Hasidic literature, the word chamor, which means donkey, is often connected to the material, which is chomer, which is a word that's often used in medieval literature for the stuff of matter. And so often you'll see that chamor, donkey, becomes a relationship with the body, or the relationship with our animal self, as you would say, and the various parts of our carnality. How we deal with that. And if you hate it, and you burden it too much, then of course, no, that's not a good thing, right? Then that can actually come back to haunt you. Thank you so much. I think that I know that there are at least 5 more people here whose hands are up, and I'm gonna have to hold off for a bit until we have to go into a bit more of the text, and then I'll come back. So keep your hands up, and hopefully what you had to say will still be relevant when we learn a little bit of the Rambam. So I wanted to look at the first verse, which is the verse on Hashavat Aveidah, which is returning a lost object. Let's go back there to the beginning here. When you will see the shor or yivcha, your enemy is, right, ox or is donkey, hashev tishivenu lo. This becomes the mitzvah of hashavat aveidah. This is the commandment to return a lost object. Now, returning a lost object or lost property is a really complicated thing, like knowing how to do it and when to do it. Just wanted to give you a sense of the way that the rabbis in the Mishnah, which is the 2nd century codification of Jewish law, how they deal with it. It's one of the most famous chapters in oral Torah, in the Torah of the Mishnah. You learn it quite young if you're in a traditional setting. I learned this, I remember, very young, very early, this particular Mishnah. Elu mitzio shalova elu chayav lahachriz. Right? If there are lost objects, says the Mishnah in what is called Bava Metzia, which is one of the tractates of the Mishnah and then the Talmud. Metzia means to find something. These are the mitziot that are belonging to you, and these are the mitziot that you have to, make a public proclamation and find the owner, right? These are the lost object, mitziot, right? And so then the Mishnah will go through. If you find items, right, that are perot mufuzarin, these, right, you find scattered produce, scattered coins, bundles of grain in a public area, round cakes. These are all things that are quite common, and that, like, to some degree, the Mishnah says, they don't have any what's called simanim. They don't have any, how would you know? It's like, it's not like you found a wallet, right? When I was with my sons, I went ice skating with them a couple of weeks ago, and we left something in the Uber. And we called the Uber driver, and he said, "I have it. Like, I know that it's yours. You were in the back seat. I have. It was a phone, and so I knew it belonged to you, and I knew that it had, simanim, and I knew what it was. But there are certain things that if you find them, like if you find a $10 bill on the street corner in New York, you don't have any chayav. You're not obligated to publicly proclaim, I found a $10 bill. Like, how is anybody going to claim it, right? It's like, yeah, it's mine. Okay." All right, so there are these there are legal, right? There are legal things that are, the Talmud goes into what's called yeush, despair, right? If an owner's despair of recovering an article was lost or stolen, the lost article whose owner has given up hope of its recovery is considered ownerless, hefker, and may be acquired by the finder, right? This becomes this category called hefker, which is essentially that you give up on ever finding it, is a profoundly intimate category, because the Talmud goes on to say that there are some things that even if they don't have simanim, even if they don't have signs, it's so intimate that you never ever give up on it, right? You never give up on it. And I remember one of my, this is, I remember once reading that the Hasidic Rabbi said that's the reason why no matter how lost a person is, if they come to you and they give you their soul, right, and they say, I'm so lost, you say, it doesn't. You always have to try to give them back their soul, because no matter what, someone's soul is never hefker. They never give up, right? Even if they say they've given up on themselves and they're in the worst place imaginable and they have quote unquote despair, there's never. It's like that's what Rav Nachman of Breslov said. Ein yeush ba'olam klal. There's no despair, right? That's so right. You fall down, you get back up. You fall down, you get back up. That's the way that the Hasidic masters relate to this. But certainly there are things that people give up on, right? They do despair of having an article returned to them, and so they have a whole series of law around this. Now, there are righteous individuals who know even when they're in the moment, and they could be legally permitted to own something, they don't give up on it. Here's an example. The story of Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach was a great scholar who lived in Jerusalem. He was a God-fearing man and spent all of his time in the study of Torah. This is from the Talmud. It's given over in a book that I quoted, but it's in the Talmud. He had many disciples, but he never accepted any fees from them. He earned his meager livelihood by making ink. And early in the morning, Shimon ben Shetach would go to the woods and gather a sack full of chestnuts and carry it home on his shoulders. And out of these nuts, he would make ink and sell it. And since Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach was very poor, he had no regrets. But even though he had no regrets except one, that he spent too much time carrying the loads of nuts on his bare shoulders. He wished if he could spend his time in the company of his students and teach them more and more of the divine wisdom of the Torah. Finally, he decided to buy a mule. He thought if he bought a mule, it would be easier. He sold the chattels of his home, and he bought the mule. When he brought the mule from the market, his students went out to use it. They stroked it and petted it and admired it, and then they suddenly discovered a precious stone hanging down from its neck, hidden in a little bag. The students rushed into the house. God's name be praised, they exclaimed. God has rewarded your piety. You are a wealthy man now. You will have no more want. And they showed him the precious diamond which they discovered on the mule, but Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach did not share their excitement. He said, God forbid that I should take this diamond. I only bought a mule from an Ishmaelite, and this diamond does not belong to me. Whereupon Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach ran to the market in search of the man who had sold him the mule. He found the Ishmaelite and returned to him the precious stone. The Ishmaelite was amazed at such unheard of honesty. Right? Blessed be the God of Shimon ben Shetach, he exclaimed. And he never became tired of repeating it over and over again. This story, of course, right, you think to yourself, okay, that diamond, of course, is an object that one would never, ever, right, give up on. It's not in the category of becoming hefker. But of course, according to rabbinic law, if it belonged to a non-Jew, this Shimon ben Shetach was not required, as it were, to bring it back to him. But the story is brought to show you the lengths of piety, of returning a lost object, right? To return a lost object to someone, even if under normal conditions or purely legal conditions, one would not be required to. Now let's look. I want to look at the Rambam now on what it is to help your quote unquote enemy, or quote unquote right, your enemy whose animal is rovetz tachat masa'o, that is like it's too heavy. So this is the Rambam. Remember the Rambam, 1135 to 1204, the greatest philosopher and I guess the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages, without a doubt, who codified the entire Talmud into something called the Mishnah Torah, the second Torah. Made it easy for those who didn't study Talmud to just open it up and find out what they were supposed to do. And this is in the 13th chapter of Hilchot Rotzech U'Shmiras Nefesh. Misha Paga B'Chavero. If someone on the road meets their friend, Uvehemto Rovetzet Tachad Masa'a, and right, we're talking about a friend, and the animal is right, it's too heavy. Ben she'aleh masa or oila ben she'aleh yoser mi masa'a. Whether it's like, listen, it's only 5 pounds, what's the big deal? Or it's way too much. Doesn't matter. Right? Hareze mitzvah lifrok mi aleh zo mitzvahs aseh. This is a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah commandment, or it's a positive commandment in practice to actually help remove its burden. Lifrok me aleh means to remove its burden. And he quotes the verse that we just learned, 23:5. Azov to azovimo, you must help them. It then goes on to say, and I don't have this, I tried to look for it in the English, but it came in the German, but that wouldn't be useful for me. I'll translate it as we go along. V'lo yifrok v'yanichena nivhal v'yelech ela yakim imo. And so this comes back to Paul's emphasis on the word imo, which is with him. He says, don't just take off the burden of the beast, right? And then walk away shocked, right? And person's completely, just changed their tire. You have to wait until they're back on their feet and they're driving along the road again. That's what it means. Imo means you have to do it with them and make sure that they're up again and on their way. Shenemar hakem takim imo. He says it wouldn't be okay to do that, right? It wouldn't be okay just to lift it up or just to take off the burden. You have to make sure that you lift up the animal too. Now let's get to where he talks about the mitzvah here, the particular mitzvah of someone who isn't your friend, let's say. So this is in number 14. Hasonei, when the Torah used the word your enemy or the one whom you hate, Shene'emar b'Torah lo me'umot ha'olam. This is not speaking about someone you hate from the nations of the world, let's say, but it is a Jew. And then he asks the rhetorical question, how could it be possible that you have somebody who's a Jew that you hate? The Torah told us you're not allowed to hate anybody. In Leviticus 19, verse 17, it says, Lo tisnad achicha b'levavecha, you're not allowed to hate somebody. How could it even be possible to imagine that it's a Jew that you hate? So it must be that it's somebody who, in the moment, was somebody that you have an issue with in the present moment. Shera'ahu levado she'avar averav hisrabo. So let's say somebody who's engaged in unskillful activity, and you said don't do that, right? Right? You said to them, don't do that evil thing, or don't do that thing that's not skillful. Don't do that thing that's a really bad idea. And you watched them and you bore witness against them and said, don't do it, and they still did it. Right? So he said it's kind of like a momentary passing state of mind. You're angry at them about something. It's not that you actually hate them, right? Doesn't matter. He says, so the Torah here is interested in the well-being of your fellow human being, even if you have a momentary state where you're angry at them. Doesn't matter, right? You have to do the right thing and get over that momentary state in order to make sure that they're out of danger. HaTorah hekpida al nafshos Yisrael ben risha'im ben tzadikim. Right? He says the Torah is worried about, here we'll say Jews, but humans, whether they're in the moment of their greatness or in the moment of their fall, whether, Brian Stevenson would say, the moments where their worst moment or their best moment, Torah still says you have to do the right thing. Right? So I'm going to open this now. We'll stop the share and I'm going to open it. The Torah is imagining a world where the mitzvah of helping our neighbor is not dependent upon the best moment or the worst moment of their lives, and it's not based on a moment of where we are either convenienced or inconvenienced. There's an obligation from the Torah, azov to azovimo. You have to help them with their burden because that's your obligation. So I'm going to now go back to those who had their hands up and see what else is going on here. Go ahead, Jill.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Shabbat shalom. So I look at it kind of as maybe not necessarily a redistribution of wealth, but a redistribution of goodwill. And I mean, this kind of the larger big picture theme of this parsha. So when no matter how poor you are, you find something, you also have can be entitled to the dignity of returning that item. And then when you return that item, maybe in a scenario where the person has a lot more, that person gets humbled and says, you know, if this person can return an item to me who really needed it, how much more am I supposed to do for my fellow? So it's, you know, all of these rules basically kind of put people together who otherwise may not have come together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It cuts across in that way. We all know the experience of what it is to lose something that's precious to us. And we also know the experience in the second verse of being in both cases, we're in a place of vulnerability, right? There's a deep vulnerability that Torah here wants to make sure that that we are recognizing vulnerability. You know, it's so easy. And in the second verse, right, there's something that you don't like, or you're in the way the Rambam imagined this, like you've fallen into a bad way with them, right? And you know, let's think for a moment. I was talking to a friend yesterday who hasn't reached out to someone who was very close to them for a very long time, and the person I spoke to was afraid, was worried about calling this person because, you know, they still haven't worked through all of their things, right? But the person who isn't being called is very hurt because they're in a very vulnerable place. They're extremely vulnerable. So I think that that's like an application of lifting somebody's burden, even if you're in a bad place with them. It's like, I know that you're vulnerable. I know that you're carrying a huge burden, but I'm not gonna, I'm gonna keep driving by. I think that the Torah here is concerned in both directions, both to do what's right, but also the impact on the soul of the person who finds the object, or the soul of the person who drives by, who walks by, drives by, knowing that the other is in a place of deep vulnerability and doesn't respond. What happens to our own capacity to be ethically and morally responsible, even if it's inconvenience or even if it doesn't feel good for us, right? And I think that that's a tremendously powerful lesson on self-transcendence. Doing the right thing is not always easy and doesn't always give us that hit of adrenaline or endorphins or whatever it might be that says, oh, I did the right thing, right? Sometimes it's going to really cut against the thing that we want to do. And children have a hard time moving past this, obviously. And adults, I guess the Torah wants us to be able to hold a number of different mind states in the same mind, right? It's okay to still have an issue with you, but to do the right thing. And that's hard. And then coming back to what you were saying in terms about also creating mutuality and this thick network of connection with one another, right? It goes a long way when you do something that's difficult for another that's in a bad place with you. It builds trust and maybe even paves the way towards reconciliation in a holy way. So thank you for that. Friends, we have 8 minutes, and I really want to honor our 9:45 stop time today because of the snow conditions and people who were making the services happen. We came from many different places. So if we can be brief, even though I know everything is so precious. So go ahead, Ilana. Thank you. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Ilana.
Boker Tov. So I am thinking about Aviva Zornberg's teaching this week, where she talks about the paradox of justice as having violence at the core, and asks the question, where is mercy and compassion? And certainly I think, as others also have spoken to, that these verses really are a kind of technology of compassion, and they're sort of embedded in it is a kind of notion of restorative justice. And I'm thinking on a psychological or psychospiritual level, What does it mean to own that which is beloved of the enemy? It's a way of maybe holding on to hatred and revenge and perpetuating violence, so that when we let go of what is beloved of the enemy, we restore compassion and mercy within ourselves, as well as providing restoration for our enemy, which has to be the basis of any kind of momentary peace of any kind within ourselves and in our communities.
That's beautiful. I think that, that you just said so much that we could just have a whole class just on what you said in terms of understanding these verses, restorative justice, and what happens in us when we relinquish, when we let go of that which we have come in. It's a wonderful life, right? Writ large, politically and socially, and what it is to hold something that is so precious to someone is also to cause them suffering, and in some way to engage in a kind of revenge, right? Also, right, it becomes retributive in some sense, and so this becomes, it's a beautiful inquiry. This what you're saying, and thank you. I think that's a gift also. These two verses, the technology, the tools of compassion. Thank you, Ilana. Brother Daniel, go ahead, my friend.
So am I unmuted? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what I have heard you say a few times, Rabbi David, is to do the right thing. The right thing is the notion of integrity, to do what is yashar. And I know you've sometimes said that yashar is a meta teaching of the Torah. And in some ways, a companion meta teaching would be one of the lessons from Sinai, which is that the divine is a source of compassion. And just before these verses that we studied is the story about somebody who loses their coat and returning the coat to the person who lost their coat, and they're cold at night, and you're going to hear the cry of that person, and the divine says, so it will be if that person cries out to me, I shall listen, for I am compassionate, ani chanun. So it's kind of right there that in all of these verses that we're studying, the divine really wants us to know the difference between the voice of compassion that can be with the vulnerability. And I think that's sort of what's being asked of us, is to notice, to do some real noticing inside of our own vulnerability. Can we be with our own vulnerability with compassion and integrity so that we can be with the other person's? I think this is sort of the Thich Nhat Hanh teaching of engaged compassion. But it's an inside out movement that we have to really look at our own ra, not just as evil or misfortune, yes, but the vulnerability there, right, that's also a source of compassion.
Yeah, I love it. I think that to situate these verses and the other verses, and to remember that what's at stake even before this moment is, again, the vulnerable, and that God says, I will hear their cry, which is another way of saying that we should hear their cry too. And then to say that that these verses are dealing with, again, extreme vulnerability, and locating that inside of ourselves too is really powerful. And I want to also extend here, and again, I know that what I also wanted to show today is that the details of compassion, right, the very particular details and the very precise ways that we walk out compassion is actually very beautifully expanded upon in not only in Mishpatim, but also, let's say, in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, in the ways that our tradition tried to codify the very real moments of, what one is to do in order to fully alleviate and to fully respond and to fully be available, mm-hmm, right? And so it speaks to me very much what you're saying. And I just also will say that the Torah is also being very human in the way that it's saying that you still might be angry, or you still, you might have enemies. There might be all kinds of things that, again, that you come down from Sinai and you're still working through. But one, mm-hmm, doesn't have to wait until one is completely, in the clear of those feelings to still do the right thing. And that's also right there. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. Ariella, I also wanted to ask if there were people, we have 2 minutes, but Ariella, go ahead. And Juliet, I don't know if you still wanted to say what you had to say before, but maybe. Go ahead, Ariella.
So I'm struck by these verses, not the one about the mishpat in the court, but the other ones, and then the Ishmaelite story as being a message, which is you can have empathy for your friends, and you would probably pick up the burden if it was your friend's, donkey. But this is these are a set of laws that prevent us from thinking about people we don't know or don't like or have anger towards, and saying, no, they're just like you. And that's why this story from the Talmud goes further. Not is it just the donkey and the diamond. It's the donkey and the diamond and the Ishmaelite. He's just like you. Right. So don't just have empathy and compassion for your people you care for.
I love it. I think, I have to be very honest. So I'm always honest with you guys, but I'll be very, very, very honest. Meaning, like, when I read these verses last year and 2 years before that, I knew that at the time, you can imagine that sometimes in a shul, some people walk away because they're upset about this or about that. It's a temporary thing, and I remember when Romemu was going through a very heavy time, I remember thinking to myself, you know what? Even if you're angry, you should still step in and help out with the burden that we're all carrying. Right? It's not, it might be, some of you might not even know this, but, Romemu, like every shul, has had its moments where people have said, you know what, I'm not so happy with the leadership. I'm going to walk away now and I'll come back and we'll see. The time to do that is not when they're carrying a burden and they're on the ground and barely being able to get up, right? The Torah has a commandment that no matter how you feel momentarily, or even if it lasts for a little while, like, you still have to recognize that the other person's donkey is suffering, and so is that other person, and it's something that's precious to them, and they could use your help. And sometimes I think that also the brilliance of the Torah here is also that sometimes in order to forgive, we have to give. In order to be in a place of forgiveness, we have to begin giving. And that's true for all of us on some level when we're in a place of anger, or as Ariella said, we're with somebody with whom it's not easy, to be in this giving and receiving of energies with one another. So there's a lot more to talk about here. And goodness gracious, even an hour on this one thing. And I wanted to pick something that was decidedly, a bit, as I said, a bit more prosaic, a little bit more in the school of the legal than it was in the school of the more expansive, to explore some of the nitty-gritty that Mishpatim points towards. I'm going to leave, and then obviously I know that you guys have these incredibly robust conversations after the teachers leave, so I hope that you continue to talk in Torah together. I'm going to make my way over to the snowed-in sanctuary, where we're going to be hopefully having some services in about 15 minutes. I hope all of you are warm, and that you're not under too heavy a burden, and that this Torah learning was itself a kind of lifting up together of the things that we're carrying. But stay safe, everybody, and I wish you all a good Shabbos, and see you soon, hopefully. Shabbat Shalom. Yasher Kochachem.